Hey, it's Will with Everything No One Taught You About Money, and in this video, you're going to learn why you should not prioritize paying down all debt as quickly as possible. One of the key components of 90s financial advice that we've all learned and we've all heard over and over again is that debt is bad, it's always bad, and you should try to get out of it as quickly as possible if you get into it. And let me be clear, there are certainly cases where that's true. The most obvious example of the big bad wolf is credit card debt. At the time of this recording, interest rates are anywhere from 18 to 25% on credit card debt. That's a great example of debt where this rule actually would apply. If you have credit card debt, it's going to be really hard to argue why you should not try to aggressively pay it off as quickly as possible. The problem with interest rates that high is you are going to be digging a bigger and bigger hole each month as your principal and interest compound at those crazy rates. And it's just a big hole in the boat that's really, really hard to plug. If you have debt like that that's really high and really out of control, there's not a whole lot of better places to put money other than paying off that debt and trying to eradicate it as quickly as possible. So that obviously is a great example of a time where this would apply. The problem is 90s financial advice has extrapolated this rule to everything, and it's kind of a universal rule. Debt is always bad. You should always try to pay it off as quickly as possible. There's a lot of cases where that might not actually be true, and we'll look at one of them today. One of the things you should do is you should pull up all your debts and write them down, and then use our debt score calculator, which is going to be in the link to this video, and give each one of your debts a grade. You're going to have 3 grades, right? You're going to have 1 to 50, which is debt that you should for sure pay off, prioritize paying off as quickly as humanly possible. 50 to 100, which is debt you kind of want to keep an eye on, and really that's something where you might try to restructure those debts primarily. And then anything that has a score of 100 or greater is debt where there's a strong case that you really do not need to worry about paying that off right now. And that's the kind of debt that I'm talking about in this video. Any kind of debt where you have a score of 100 or over, it's really not going to be efficient for you to try to pay that off as quickly as possible. And we'll look at some of the downsides of why that is. The biggest problem with paying down debt that has a debt score of 100 or greater is that you do not receive any benefit from taking that action and paying that off, especially if you're trying to pay it off quickly. You don't receive any benefit until it's completely paid off. So a student loan might be an example of a debt that would fall in this category, right? And the problem is, let's say that your payment is, $460 and you're doubling that every month. So you're trying to do $920 a month to pay this thing off as quickly as possible because that's what you've been told and that's what's been hammered in your head. So you do that for a year, right? So 12 payments of an extra $460 is $5,520. So that's $5,520 that you no longer have for that entire year. Okay, so you don't have the benefit of having that cash in the bank for anything that might come up, which could be a lot. You also don't have the benefit of that cash flow, that payment every month to the student loan being freed up yet. You still owe the payment, and you also don't have the cash. So there was no benefit in that time span of paying that extra loan down because, again, there's no benefit until it's completely paid off. The other problem is, let's just say you did make the 12 payments on time and you paid the extra principal down, and then month 13 or month 15 or month 18 rolls along and you have a bad month. You have a job loss. Maybe you have a baby and you have a big financial burden that month. And for some reason you're tight and you are struggling to get that student loan paid that month. They don't care. They don't care that you're ahead of schedule. They don't care that you've been making extra principal payments. They don't care that you've been on time. You're not going to get any slack from them. And so again, having paid that extra down over that amount of time, it doesn't help you in that situation. And in that scenario, it actually hurts because you really could have used some of that extra cash, some of that extra $5,500 you've put into the student loan over the last year to help pad your medical emergency or the new baby or the job loss. You don't have it. So in that sense, it's actually making you poorer. It's not making you wealthier, right? And you're going to say, well, it's, on paper, it's decreasing my liabilities, which is technically increasing my net worth. That's true, but we're going to have to do another video on net worth. In that scenario, having an increased net worth because your liability decreased a little bit does not help you because you cannot access, again, you can't access that money. That money has been sent away And regardless of whether you need it, it doesn't buy you any benefit. So the other side of this coin is, instead of putting that $5,500 into a student loan, obviously we have to look at the opportunity cost. How could that have been invested, right? Even if you're just going to do S&P 500, right? What would that kind of return have looked like? Number one, if it's in the S&P 500, it's going to be liquid, where you can get to it if you need it. Even if it was just sitting in a savings account, that would be helpful if you have job loss or if you have a medical emergency. That can keep you from having a really big problem. So really, the bigger principle here is, the problem with this is when you're paying these loans down way ahead of time and quickly, you are putting valuable dollars that you've earned and worked hard for and that can be used for anything. You're putting them in a place where you do not receive a benefit until way later, and where they cannot be accessed again if you need them. So if we're living in a time where we have inflation and the value of the dollar is decreasing over time, which means that if you are on a W-2 income and if you receive a salary, you are taking small little pay cuts as the government prints money and as inflation continues. And also, if you're a young family and you have growing expenses because you're starting a family or whatever, you're trying to buy a house, you're having kids, whatever else, you've got those two things pushing on your budget. And when you pay down debts ahead of time, you are compounding those effects by limiting your cash flow. Cash flow and cash is great because it's something that can be used for whatever you need at that given time. We don't always know what's coming around the corner. We don't always know when there's going to be an emergency or a job loss or a baby or whatever else. And that's why having cash is prudent, and having savings is prudent, and investing is prudent. But what's been ingrained in us and what's been taught is to pay down debt early, which again means that you are self-inflicting limited cash flow. Okay, I already talked about the external factors that are limiting your cash flow. Now you are also limiting your cash flow by throwing it in this place where it doesn't benefit you until way later and you can't get the money if you need it. So this is why you should thoughtfully consider and look at all your debts and give each one a score and figure out, does it make sense to continue paying down early the mortgage on my house? Because that's, there's a lot of advice out there that says, go get a mortgage on your house, whether it's 15-year or 30-year, and then pay that thing down as quickly as possible, because you're not free until that's gone. Video on that, by the way, later. Okay? Student loans would be another example, right? There's all kinds of loans that could qualify for this, right? It really depends on your loan balance and your payment. I want you to learn how to think about money, because that's really the way out of all this, right? If you can learn how to think about money, you don't have to follow my advice or anybody else's advice, okay? So the bigger principle behind all this is, if you are a young family and you're feeling squeezed financially, okay, then we need to increase cash flow because of those external factors I talked about. Inflation and the natural increasing of expenses that come with a family, those are going to be pushing on your budget and on your cash flow. So let's not self-impose any more cash flow problems. So again, don't take my advice on this, but just think through this for yourself. Does it make sense for you to continue paying your mortgage down early, to continue paying the student loan down debt early? Are you getting a benefit from that? Do you feel like that's worth it? Can you think of anything else that you would rather do with that money, or that makes more sense to do with that money, or that could give you more optionality and potentially build wealth for you better than that? Okay? So just think through that. Might be an interesting exercise. Check out our debt score calculator in the comments below this video, and we'll see you next time.